Welcome to another episode of Four Guys Talking About AI. I'm here with my good friends, John Gerard, Neil Polachek, and Greg Sterling.
Hi, Andy.
What's up, guys? How's it going?
What's up, Andy?
Hey. All right. Well, so tons of stuff happening this week in the world of AI. We're going to dip into agentic AI. Interesting things happening on the front with Amazon and some other really interesting conversations. This is a little bit notes from the field around voice AI agents and how they're being used. So we'll talk a little bit about that. There's a Pew research about whether AI jobs are coming for your job and how the sentiment of how people are feeling about that. So we'll get into that a little bit, and Google's new AI mode, expanding AI overviews and threading in AI results into the search results page. So we'll dig into that a little bit. But first off, let's talk about agentic AI. Amazon Web Services is making a bet into AI, and they're going, of course, deep into it in several fronts. But this is with respect to AWS. And from what it sounds like, they're going to be developing a platform that could quite very well be their next very large business in the way that AWS is, to make it easy for people to create different apps using AI very quickly, just use the LLMs and framework structures to be able to create these kinds of applications.
I think what they're making their bet on is agentic AI and enabling the human to basically step away and let these agents do a lot of the work that humans might have triggered or created prompts for in the past.
Is this the kind of thing where it's like you feed it a bunch of business information of successful startups, for example, and you say, here are 20 successful startups, run the play on the marketing side, build me a website that is top tier, all these different aspects of when you build a company that you have to do. Is it like that kind of a thing, you think?
I think so. I mean, to quote them, for customers, this means having an AI assistant that independently completes tasks on your behalf.
Right.
So,
and I think the right way to think about it is, yes, that's where that would go eventually. And in the short term, I think the other quote that you read, Neil, that was amazing was something like, we are trying to make the AWS interfaces AI agent friendly, meaning, making it easier for agents to interact directly with AWS, which presumably means, because AWS is primarily about infrastructure and servers and load balancing and making sure the database stays online, that now what we're talking about is what's classically the development operations or DevOps role being outsourced to an AI agent, which is really impressive and fascinating, a little bit wild.
well, an AWS AI agent, to be specific in their case.
Presumably, although I suspect that if well, yes, I think that's right. You're right. That's the angle that they're going for.
Let's talk a little bit about what that actually means. I think when we talk about agentic AI or agents, kind of like the finer point of actually what that means, it kind of washes past people. And it's important to really understand the nuance and the distinction of that, right? So, for example, a voice AI agent can be somebody that answers the phone, answers questions in that particular situation, but then passes that call off maybe to another agent who's a customer support agent and has a specialty with customer support or finance. Or so a little bit like a really simplified version of this is the IVR tree. Press one, press marketing.
Hopefully a better experience than that.
For sure, right. But if you think about it like that, it makes it, when you press, for sales, then you get the sales agent that's trained up on all the depth of sales, or customer support, you get all the depth of customer support in that particular agent. It seems to simplify things a little bit. So when we're talking about like an AWS agent, like what is that? What do you guys think that is?
Well, presumably, I haven't looked at their releases, but presumably there's a range of functions. I mean, Microsoft and Salesforce also kind of put out similar PR. Salesforce has an has a app store essentially for agents, and Microsoft is building a bunch of agents into Copilot, and they're trying to sort of automate a bunch of functions that are important for operational functions, marketing functions, sales functions. Pick your flavor. I think they're going to be agents for all kinds of jobs that have been done historically by people.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question to kind of ask, what do we mean when we talk about agents in the context of AI and agentic AI? And I think that using the metaphor of a human agent is a useful but maybe misleading starting point, because we mean something slightly different when we talk about agentic AI. The simplest way to think about agentic AI is that it is an AI that you can give a specific goal to, and then the AI will iterate as a human might until it achieves that goal, right? So unlike ChatGPT experience where you put in a simple query and you get an answer, what you're doing is saying, for instance, in the example of an AWS agent, make sure that our uptime is 99.999%, right? So then what happens? Well, we have to back up here for a second and go over some stuff that we talked about in prior episodes. But one of the really magical things about LLMs is that they are incredibly good at taking arbitrary natural language input. We can say anything that a human would understand to an LLM, and it will kind of know what we're saying. So unlike the old world where we had to say it exactly right to get Siri to turn on our lights or lock our door, the LLMs are able to take any arbitrary input if it's fairly well formed and interpret it and make sense of it. They're also really good at creating very well formed output. So guess what? They can give themselves instructions, right? So the way that a DevOps agent in this context might work is the very first query might be, you are, and this would be done internally. So I give it the instruction to hit 99.99% uptime. You are an expert DevOps engineer. You are being tasked with the responsibility to keep this system at 99.999% uptime. Please create a 25 point list on all the steps that you would need to take in order to achieve that goal, including the systems you would use, the systems that you would rely on for monitoring, how you would know if you'd achieved it or not, who you would interact with, who you would notify in the case of failures. Go, right? So now the agent creates that list, and then it steps through one by one.
And that's all self-prompted, you're saying.
And that's all self-prompted. So this is what we mean when we say agentic AI. Like at its core, really what it's doing is giving itself instructions and then stepping through those one by one. That's part one of two essential things that happen with agentic AI. The second essential thing that happens with agentic AI is that it has some other access to the outside world. So I could give an AI the prompt to prompt itself and step through a list of things. Like, I'm going to give you all this data, create a list for yourself of the 10 steps it would require to cleanse this data and turn it into something useful. And it would go and do that. But that's like in a black box, right? So if you want it to be a DevOps agent, it now also needs to have access to the outside world. It needs to have access to the development environment, to the AWS panels, to the monitoring systems that tell it how much information or how much uptime there is and where there's failures. So that's the second critical point, bucket of things that it needs. You get self-referential, it writes its own instructions, and you have access points to the outside world where it can actually cause something to happen. Boom, you have an AI agent.
Yeah, this is the point at which I say, open the pod bay doors, Hal.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And then the machine says, I can't do that, Dave.
I can't do that, right?
If you've seen the movie.
Good.
And I know I'm on a good one here, but like, this is also what the AI philosophers and frankly the science fiction authors like Isaac Asimov, 50 years ago were talking about when they said, be really, really careful what the fitness function is. Be really, really careful what it is that you're asking the AI to do. Like in the classic thought experiment, the paperclip optimizer, you ask the AI to optimize the creation of paperclips, and eventually it turns the whole universe into paperclips, right? So we're in that weird space right now where science fiction and historical philosophy are becoming science fact.
You gonna have 6 fingers?
I might. I think it's quite possible. Who says I don't already?
I think there's an enormous temptation. I mean, I think this is all magical, right? I mean, especially for people who aren't particularly technically inclined, the way these tools work is just magical. But I think there's a danger that people can, that this. I mean, this is. I don't want to get too far down this path, but that there's too much reliance without a sort of an understanding of what's going on underneath, right?
And it's moving really quickly, right? So the stuff that you're talking about underneath the surface that's happening very quickly is not breaking through to the rest of the world just yet, right?
Well, and think about what happens when I read something. I don't know what the source was that it was something about Y Combinator's latest startup cohort, which was saying that most of the code, most or all of the code in these startups was written by AI. You know, which and it may be perfectly fine, but there's a way in which, I mean, this goes to a point that Neil has made repeatedly about kind of getting rid of this tier of uh, kind of apprentices, right? Sort of getting rid of the first years, getting rid of the new hires in favor of AI, in banking and law and in whatever.
Well, or
And
enabling those new hires to be much more productive than they would have been. I don't want to lose sight of that the daily stuff that we are all now using AI to do and blows our mind every time we ask it to do something. And it's not agentic stuff. It's not taking over the world.
well,
It's
some of it's agentic. Deep research is agentic.
Yeah, but me putting in a list of plants that I don't know what they look like and having it create images so I know what they're going to plant in my garden is incredibly useful. I mean, off the chart useful. I would have spent out, going up and looking for image. I mean, the consumer is going to get even more committed and it's going to deliver more value to the consumers.
For sure, AI is enormously valuable. The only danger is that people lose the expertise, the understanding to second guess the machines or to know what's going on behind the scenes to intervene. They lose the ability to code, or they lose the ability to. I mean, a lot of content creators. The number one use case for AI in marketing is content creation, and that's up leveling all the shitty content that's online, but it's creating sort of bland mediocrity for a lot of the content that you see. And it gets harder and harder for people over time to think about generating stuff from scratch or writing something from a blank page, because it's so easy to just say, hey, I've got to write this topic, I've got to write this report or this blog post or whatever, this competitive analysis on this topic, and boom, it'll spit out something that's perfectly serviceable. And that's great. It's an enormous time savings, but it makes people a little sloppier, a little lazier, a little more I mean, there's been some research on this, sort of diminishes, I mean, efficiency, yes, but it may have some costs for the society, which we can leave at the door here.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things you're addressing there that are interesting, and one of them is this idea of opacity, which is we don't quite know how it does the things that it does, and like, okay, so all this whole cohort of companies in Y Combinator, I think is what you said it was.
Yes. Right.
That all the code is written in AI, and so is there a CTO or head of tech there that actually understands what the code is doing, and does it matter whether they understand that or not, right? So there, there's this funny thing and looking at the history of technology and innovation in humanity, where it was actually quite a long time ago that we got to the point where there was no single human who knows how to do or build or create most of the important things. Like even something as simple as a pencil, there's actually not a single human that if we were all wiped out would probably know all the exact steps to refine the graphite and to, put the wood just so, and to, smelt the metal that was needed for the eraser holder, and, find the right rubber for the eraser itself and make sure it has that pink hue, right? Like none of that stuff is probably, yeah, and smells that way, right? Like we've gotten far enough away that there isn't any single person who knows how to do any of these things.
Number two.
Let me correct this statement because I was doing it from memory. So the statement is a quarter, 25% of the current batch of startups in the Y Combinator cohort, this class, have 95% of their code bases generated by AI. So it's a smaller number of companies, but most or all of the code is being AI generated. So that may work perfectly fine. It may enable startups that otherwise wouldn't exist. Lots of great stuff, but all technology is double-edged. So we should probably move on to another topic. We'll come back to this, I'm sure.
Well, on the agentic side, so one thing I just wanted to also touch on, there's a little notes from the field, but in this past week, we have a voice AI agent that we've created that's answers the phone for people, and it can handle up to 200 inbound calls concurrently. And then on the 200th call, if there's another one, it just rolls over to the next one, so it can just have this expandable bank. And it's really interesting in the use case is really interesting for emergency services, right? So we just had the Palisades fire here in Los Angeles, and getting a hold of anybody in the fire department at that time was, you just couldn't, unless you had the right number to find that certain dispatch. But getting hold of anybody else was just impossible. And this happens all the time in these emergency situations, or time-based situations. So if you're, if there's tickets to an event or something like that, it doesn't have to be an emergency, but when there's a certain event that happens and there's a rush to be able to contact somebody on the other end, those happen to be really good use cases.
Your flight is canceled.
Your flight is canceled. It's a great example, right? So you end up having hundreds of people calling, what do I do? Those are great use cases for a voice AI agent. And those agents can become very smart and handle the situations quickly and efficiently, deliver a great customer experience, and solve a big pain point for that business on the other hand. So I had a couple of conversations with one with the police department this week that was just fascinating, going through the exploration of their use cases and the challenges that they have in just any kind of police situation, or also in a fire situation too. I spoke with a fire department as well about how the voice AI can help them in their situation. There's also a couple of videos on YouTube about how there's the municipality in Chattanooga, for example, is using voice AI as a triage agent in some of their calls, not all of their calls, but for certain ones that aren't emergency calls that take up those emergency resources, it's able to push those off, handle those calls, and free up the resources. And so this kind of stuff that's happening in the field right now is really compelling. They're interesting use cases of how those agents are being used at a consumer level, where there's a confusing moment that all happens at the same time.
And everybody's trying to figure it out within the same hour or two.
Yeah. And this idea of being able to spin up, nearly infinite capacity on the fly. Like the other example I think of is if you are an evil AI living in the Matrix trying to hunt down the one, and your Agent Smith. Does everybody remember that scene where there's like 100 Agent Smiths that get created? Oh my God, in the Matrix? Like this is the perfect example of that. He was even called Agent Smith. I mean, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, that's
Is that all you're going to say about the Matrix?
Well, gosh, I will say also that I just showed it to my sons for the first time a couple weeks ago, and it was incredible. And I feel bad I waited that long. But what I
Only the first movie is the only one worth watching, basically.
It's the only one. I told them that too after we watched it. I was like, "Don't get your hopes up about 2, 3, and whatever."
Four.
And 4, yeah. But actually, what I was going to say is, Andy, like you were somebody who actually built an human agent based business where this problem intimately of forecasting how many people are we going to need on the phones at this particular point in time, and the wild card of an external event that changes that by a factor of 5 is a company melter. I mean, it just everybody falls apart in the face of that when that happens.
So true. And that is the maker of bad reviews right there, right? Like, so having some defense against that is critical. And you're absolutely right. Like, what's interesting at Helpware, when we did this before AI, we would build these SOPs for businesses. Even before we went into production, we'd build this whole roadmap and this communication flow for how we can optimize and deliver a better customer experience, and then map that to how people would handle phone calls or emails and deliver a better customer experience. And so taking that same blueprint and concept and applying it to this agentic AI environment is a perfect fit. It's really
Yeah.
I totally appreciate the call capacity issue and getting through to people and all of that, and I'm very hopeful that these agents can deliver better customer experience. But one of the challenges with human customer service reps, the sort of first line service rep that you'll get often in an offshore call center, is they don't have any authority or discretion. They can't really do a lot. They can tell you what you also know from looking at your own screen very often, like in a travel context. You can see the same information basically that they have. And there's not a lot of discretion or power that they have. They've not been empowered to help solve problems. They can just, it's really about sort of getting rid of the call or doing perfunctory things. And then you have to escalate or self-serve. And how would you respond to that aspect of this? It's like the agent is supposed to be able to take action on your behalf. Do you think that that's going to be widespread and people will actually get some problems? I mean, it's one thing to say, hey, this is happening, get back to me, or whatever, or I'd like to report. It's another thing when people, like need to rebook flights or.
Yeah, but wouldn't United Airlines want it to be able to say, hey, your flight to Denver's canceled, and then you call this thing and it says, we can rebook you on a flight in an hour and a half. Please.
And it offers you the flights, right?
Yeah,
You can.
and isn't that kind of what agentic is, where it's actually doing it?
Yes. And that would be better. That would be better if they could pull that off. If they can actually pull that off, that would be a better experience.
Well, I think they'll be able to pull it off because the cost savings there is massive.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, there's a couple things here. I've wondered about this a lot. Like, the only time that I call a customer service number is when I really truly can't figure it out myself online, and it looks like there might be some way for somebody to do something about it. I don't know that I'm and I think all of us are kind of like that. I don't know that we're that normal in that sense. Like, I don't know that the majority of phone calls to customer service are for people who kind of know how to do this online and are looking for a way around it. I suspect that there's a lot more that are like my mom, where they don't really know how to do it online, and this is the easiest way for them to do it. And I think that's an easier use case for AI to solve, as opposed to what you're saying, Greg, about sort of the discretionary stuff, right?
Well, it's an 80-20 problem, right? You can get rid of most of those calls with basic functionality.
Yeah. And meanwhile, like, if the only reason I'm calling is I can't figure it out online, I'm always going to be frustrated, because neither can the agent, right? Like, they're just their hands are tied just the way mine are.
I can tell you that the minute I hit a chat, I always go to the chat bot, right? So rather than go stay on the phone, I try to go to the chat bot, and it's like, hi, I'm an AI assistant, whatever. I'm like, live agent, live agent, live agent,
Yes.
live agent, live agent.
No, exactly.
I'm not going to go through your frickin' logic tree. Just give me the.
Give me the
I
straight.
mean, the promise of the AI chatbot is you can ask your question and get a response. You don't have to
Right.
go click this button, click this button, click this button, drill down, click this button. I'm sorry, check our website.
That's
You
right.
can
And
just
into that experience with a 1 star right away. You're frustrated. You're angry. You're pissed off. And so,
it's a brand killer, right? It's
but
like
Yes.
you could flip that around and deliver a good customer experience in that
and it would
moment.
be it would be great.
This is like in this
Yeah.
next year, I think that there are a lot of companies that are going to start adopting this kind of capability to do exactly that.
People don't recognize the degree, companies don't recognize the degree to which customer service is really enhances or boosts the brand or really can detract from it. I mean, people sort of see customer service as a cost center, kind of post-sale cost center, not really tied to brand perception. I mean, some companies get it, but a lot of companies don't. And they just want to push costs out of the system. And what they really need to be doing is thinking about the customer experience that they deliver, because that's an enormous retention tool, drives word of mouth, all that stuff. Hey, I had this problem. These guys did a great thing for me, and now I'm a satisfied customer.
Ecstatic. And by the way, before we move on, I mean, interesting timing. I happened to hear this week. You mentioned this idea of the AI having some discretion, or how do you deal with that? This is actually being explored and experimented with right now, and there's already some cautionary tales and stories of rollbacks of this technology that are kind of hitting the rumor mill. Heard a story about an e-commerce a business that had deployed this tech that had some discretion in terms of offering refunds. And
Oh yeah.
in the same way, that we, when people see that it's a self-driving car, they know they can do things to make it, like stop. People started to realize that if they, yelled enough, that they would get a refund, and they had to roll this back because it gave millions of dollars of refunds that it wouldn't normally have given, and was this huge cost center that was much greater in cost than if they just kept human or agents around. So like this is also happening.
You just have to be totally confident about the technology. You have to use Andy's technology because it's next.
Right.
It's never going to mess up. It's never going to mess up.
Look, you're going to get really good reviews if you give every customer a $10,000 just for showing up. So maybe that's what the agent was optimized for.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because when you think about these agents, what's underneath all of that is this workflows, this blueprint of trigger-based actions that can happen. So when somebody says something, their flight was canceled, that can trigger a whole series of workflows that happen, and it can pass it off to the next agent who's then trained up in how to handle that situation, or rebook a flight, or or get a refund in this particular case. And sometimes what companies are doing in this early phase is combining those things into one agent, where actually this should be broken out into multiple agents, which kind of leads us into this next part of our conversation, the Pew Research study about how people are feeling about AI potentially taking their jobs. Because when you think about it like that, and you have one agent passing it on to the next one, it starts to overlay against how an organization is structured. And then you go, wait a minute, is this going to start taking away jobs? So Greg, talk a little bit about this research study that you
Yeah. Just before I get into the Pew data, I mean, the work that Neil and I have done on the B2B side, with small businesses, with agencies, with franchises, and to some degree with consumers, not in their capacity as workers, but consumers who are trying to solve problems for themselves, buy things. Everybody that has had experience with AI, not just a person looking through the window from the outside, but people that are actually using these tools, basically overcome the fear, and they see benefits. They see very concrete benefits, and it varies from scenario to scenario. So with experience comes a better attitude toward these technologies, demystification, less fear. But the Pew folks, which have been doing AI related surveys for now a couple of years, I think probably since ChatGPT came out, we're asking people about, are you more worried or excited? How do you feel about this technology? And they specifically asked, I think, let's see what the number was. It's like, I don't know what the N is here, what the sample was, but it's got to be at least 1,000. It's probably several thousand US workers. How do they feel about AI in the workplace, in their workplace? And 52% said worried, 36% said hopeful, 33% said overwhelmed, which is probably not necessarily fearful of job displacement, but struggling somewhat. And then 29%, the smallest group, said that they were excited. So excited and hopeful is these numbers are overlapping. So it was probably they're not. It's more than 100 here, I think. Let's see, maybe not 60. Yes, it is more than 100. So people are answering multiple questions. So you can be worried and overwhelmed, or you can be excited and hopeful. But basically, the largest group is worried about how this is going to impact their jobs. And if you are more educated, higher income, younger, you tend to be less worried than people who are older, less educated, and in lower income positions. People who were not in professional jobs were more worried than people in professional jobs, so-called white-collar jobs, about how AI would be impacting them, which is ironic because it's these white-collar jobs that are going to be more impacted than the workers. I mean, it depends on what level you're at, but so it's just a reflection of people. I think there's a climate now in the workplace generally of uncertainty, and this is sort of playing into that. And when COVID was during the COVID period, at least in the technology industry, there was a lot of hiring. There was a kind of a frenzy of hiring that was going on, and there was a lot of employees had a lot of power and a lot of bargaining power as employers were competing for them. Now that power dynamic has completely shifted back to the employer. We have this environment where we've got uncertain economy, uncertain outlook. We've got AI that now has very real benefits for companies, as we've been discussing. And you might not hire the same number of people, or you might not replace somebody that quits. And then you've got a sort of a climate of kind of layoffs that exist. So all of these things, I think, are in the background, combining to make people afraid that they're going to lose their jobs at some point. There's instability there for them.
Yeah, and it makes a ton of sense. And I think what you're pointing out there is, I suspect the fear is coming because it's finally being felt in the job market, right? So it's everybody's sort of la-di-da about AI or technology being disruptive until it
Until the
touches their
networks
pocketbook.
start to trickle
Yeah.
down. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. So this is probably that moment. I mean, what's interesting is in at least a couple of sort of well-documented industries or professions, the change has been happening for a while. Like, I just saw a crazy graph on software development job. Really what it was software development job postings that shows this insane. Yeah, I'm going to see if I can find it. It shows this insane peak in 2022, and then this tail off to a tiny fraction of the peak in 2022. And there's a lot of speculation about what that that graph is actually showing and actually means. But point is that this has been unfolding, at least in some industries, for a minute, and I think this is probably evidence that it's hitting people more broadly.
Well, what I think so interesting is that for that period, maybe it was 10 years, where software engineers could write their ticket. Now I think people with real emotional intelligence are going to be able to have some leverage in the marketplace.
Hopefully.
Well, I think it's the revenge of the human in this world. Like, if you have really good emotional IQ, you will be able to keep a job because somebody's going to have to talk to people at the end of it.
I hope you're right, Neil. I'm a little bit more cynical.
Right. I mean, I've watched my son's girlfriend get a job at a big MarTech company, where clearly she got it, in my opinion, because of her emotional IQ. That's what sort of moved her over the finish line. I think that's going on in a lot of places in a subtle way, and we're going to see more evidence of that going forward.
Well, there's the issue of how do you get in for the interview when there's all this AI screening of resumes. There's just so many candidates. That's a different conversation. I mean, I hope that that's right. I hope that humans that have a lot of the problem in organizations is that people who are promoted into management roles don't have any capacity to manage people. They're just good at their underlying job. And so they're high performers, and people say, here, you get the promotion. Now you're a manager. And that person has no skills, and there's conflict, and people leave the organization. I mean, I've witnessed that in a bunch of situations.
Well, and that same person I'm talking about, when she told her boss that she was leaving, was shocked, right? The boss was shocked she was leaving. I mean, that's how bad his EQ was, that he didn't realize that she was about out the door for the last 6 months. I mean, that's
Yeah. But this is one of the broader arguments about what happens in the job markets is that the things that are uniquely human actually start being prized more. And for a while, some things that were uniquely human were, data, computational, like whatever, but now that's not uniquely human anymore. What is uniquely human has sort of shifted. Here's what this looks like, right? This is a kind of an insane graph. Showing this spike in 2022. By the way, guess where ChatGPT came out? Right? Oh, you can kind of see it. Yeah, you can sort of see it right there at the peak. So, or close to it anyway, right? So, yeah. So this is pretty crazy, and I think we can expect to see something similar. One note that I think is really interesting, and maybe a subject for discussion later. There's some speculation, at least, that what ChatGPT did more than making developers go away was it put development capability in the hands of so many more of us that there's actually 10x or 100x the development work happening right now. We just don't call these people developers anymore because it's people who are solving business problems by coding using ChatGPT. So that may also be represented somewhere in this graph.
We've constructed, as we've mentioned in the past, we've constructed a digital assistant for our dialogue program, which is designed to answer data questions and other kinds of questions. And neither Neil nor I are developers, and we used a no-code platform, which you were instrumental in leading us to. And we've been able to build this working product without any coding at all. And it's it's pretty amazing.
There's the dip right here where you guys decided not to get a developer over there on the phone. That was you guys.
Man, Greg and I alone.
The two of us could not run the program we're running without AI tools. We just could not.
Imagine these no-code tools. I don't know if you played around with Zapier or Make.com, but to create these kinds of workflows that also leverage APIs, any API that exists out there, you can plug into a workflow on either of those platforms and create some magical output. I mean, it's really, in addition to writing code itself, that's the amazing part of this no code kind of environment. And soon what's going to come next is the ability to just tell it, like John, what you just said, like, this is the outcome that I want. And it'll just figure out what that workflow should be. Right now we're, doing it workflow kind of way, but that will soon go away as well. Where you'll just be able to tell it what to do. It'll come up with its own list and workflow.
Well, that's what I want to say. I mean, I think it was ChatGPT that did a demo where the guy drew an app kind of diagram on a napkin, took a picture of it, and it generated the code to create the. It's a very simplified thing. I mean, that's consistent with what you're saying, Andy. Is that people will just be able to conceptualize things, and then they will show up. I mean, or your game, the game you did, John, whenever it was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about Google's AI mode, because this is big news on the Google front. Greg, you wanna lead this one?
There's been some advanced stories about this thing called Google AI mode, which was not AI overviews, which show up in regular search results, but a button that would take you into a more Gemini or ChatGPT-like experience. And it was finally announced, I think, yesterday. And I got access to it last night, and I've just played around with it a little bit. And I'm just going to do a couple of quick searches here to show people what it looks like. So let's see, HVAC repair in San Jose, California. Okay, so what you've got here, hopefully you guys can all see this. You've got a local search result. These are ads. Then you've got more ads, and then you've got 3 businesses with reviews and what have you, right? And then you've got Yelp and other things. This is a pretty familiar page for people who are doing these local searches. So up here is AI mode. You click on that, and then it'll run the query again. And what it does is it gives me a bunch of local businesses. And some of those local businesses overlap with the result we just saw on the Google results page. And then here are the different sources for those, right? Which is individual websites and some directories and Google itself. And they just give you a kind of just the facts kind of presentation. Now, I've done this query a number of times, and sometimes you'll get star ratings and other content, and sometimes you get just the name, address, and phone number. But it's a different animal. It's a different experience than this experience, the familiar one that we're all using. I'll do another query for let's see, best running shoes for men over, let's say, 40. I'm much older than that, but you can see that, right? Yeah. So you get the ads, and you get all the ads, and then here's an AI overview, and you can expand that, and it'll tell you this is what you should consider, and here's some brands. And this gives you another opportunity when there's an AI overview to go into AI mode, and then it runs the query again, and you'll see and it's using logic, right? It's using reasoning in this situation. Then it gives you brands and some e-commerce, some editorial copy here, some content, some retailers. Gives you a mix of stuff. And so, I mean, this is a pretty interesting experience. Do you want me to do anything more before I stop sharing? Any
Do a search on how do I get paid by my insurance company for a fire?
Okay, you want me to do that on Google or AI mode? Let's do AI mode. How do I get paid by my insurance carrier for fire losses? Okay. File your claim promptly. Document the damages. Understand your coverage. Cooperate with the surly and non-cooperative insurance carrier. Yeah, I mean, it's giving you some laundry list of things, and each of these is a link to something on the right, which is different web results. Some of them are lawyers, some of them are more general Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And you can click through all of these, and they'll take you to a website. We click through here, for example.
So are those on the right, Greg? Are those that's just basically like Google search results, but they've just pushed that to the right, and they've given you the answers on the left?
Right. It's just a formatting thing. It's not as extensive a list as you would get in a conventional search results page, and of course there are no ads, but it's essentially the same thing. This is
on the right, essentially, right? Like that's like
these are organic. These are organic results. This is the equivalent of organic search results, or in some cases where there's a local search result and there's individual business websites or Google listings. That would be the equivalent of a local result that you might see in what's called the local pack, or the expanded version of that that's often referred to as the local find.
That's interesting. I mean, that is, there's a lot of questions around where SEO goes in this new environment. And that's literally the window into where it goes. That little window on the right is where,
there's a lot of people who are trying to reverse engineer how many citations, how many sources are being used by the different sites, where do they come from, how do you get into them. The sort of bedrock core piece of advice is just do really good SEO, and that will help. But people are also talking about PR, building your brand, getting into these trusted sources that the AI engines are using, so that you appear, if it's a directory or if it's a editorial, roundup or something like that, best air purifiers, that kind of thing. But it's very interesting, and it's quite a bit better experience than the AI overviews, I think, even though even though the information sometimes in the AI overview can be more extensive. But I think the interactive capability and the better UI, I think, makes for a better experience overall.
It's really cool. It's really cool. And you saw it first here. Very cool. Thank you. And the way to find that is in the Google Labs environment. We'll put a link to the where you can so in the show notes.
Yeah, you have to join a wait list, and then they'll let you in. I suspect they're letting a lot of people in today.
I'm completely embarrassed that you got in before I did, by the way.
Why do you say that?
Unacceptable.
Because you're more of a geek than me?
Yeah, well, I like to think that I am. Perhaps I'm not, but yes.
Well, you are. You are for sure. You are for sure.
I also had to jump out of the airplane. He's like,
yeah, pretty much.
Well,
I'm the one whose computer always crashes because I'm on the developer beta all the time. Like it's a sick.
Well, who knows? Who knows what the logic is? But it's very interesting because I mean, what Google's trying to do obviously is preempt people from leaving Google to go to ChatGPT or Perplexity or these other sites, and they released this number the other day. We have 5 trillion annual searches, and they're trying to convince the market that everything is just they're unimpacted by AI, but their whole product direction has been changed by ChatGPT.
Yeah, I in ChatGPT users, they've already left.
Right, and Sam Altman was in the New York at a conference, the New York Times conference, and he said we get 1 billion messages. I think he said 1 billion messages every day, and some subset of those were search-like interactions. They're not all search, and some from that. Somebody generated the extrapolated the idea that there's 3 billion prompts a day that are search-like on ChatGPT. I mean, we know from our own survey work and from other surveys that people are using AI tools in the way that they have used search in the past. It's a complicated conversation, but Google has definitely been affected. And, before November 2022, nobody was probably sitting around mapping out this product experience that you just saw. I guarantee you.
But I think there are all these new use cases too, like that. What I was saying about the plants. I mean, I would have never thought to do that anywhere. I would have gone online and typed in the name of the plant, and I'd see some images, and I'd do that 15 times. It did it all at once. And it did images, not pictures, and they look like the postage stamps. It was beautiful.
Where did you use ChatGPT for that, or did you use
ChatGPT? I literally put in a invoice from the gardener that had all these other fields on the invoice, quantity, code, all this other stuff, and it saw the plant names and created images of the plant names.
This is why I just fundamentally don't believe the explanation for LLMs, where people say it's this word order prediction mechanism, that we're just predicting the next likely word in the sequence. I just don't buy that. This kind of thing, this kind of thing is too. There's a level of understanding of what is being asked for, and I see it in my own interactions. Like the thing is understanding what I'm asking for. It's not just.
It feels like it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really feels like it. It's just not just saying, "Oh, here's the next word."
New version of ChatGPT 4.5 just came out, and that's the promise of this. Now, the token usage on it is a lot higher. Meaning, if they were rolling it out only to pro users initially because it took so many tokens, and now they're rolling it out to the plus users. But the idea is that it's more takes more inference and more of this kind of logical approach to answer, and through that it provides us more human-like or empathetic kind of output that makes it feel like it's a really thoughtful kind of experience and not just predicting the next set of words. It's actually taking the idea of what you're talking about and delivering back to you what
right. And these reasoning models are not just engaged in word prediction also, obviously.
Yeah.
And it's funny. It may be apocryphal, but the story about the original sort of models that were created that, where the developers sort of first tried this attention-based approach, and had some results come out of it, suggests that they were just as surprised as we all are about how much this appears to be evidence of understanding. There was even a quite well documented case of a Google employee
Yes.
who was so convinced that this thing was real and was conscious, and went very, very far down the rabbit hole in terms of trying to grant rights to the AI. And that was early LLM stuff that was happening. He even as somebody who was on the project and knew the underpinnings of the technology, was convinced that this was real, right? Or real consciousness.
So think about what, when you combine sort of humanoid robots, right, which are multiple companies, including uh, uh, Meta now and a bunch of others are working on these humanoid robots, and the Chinese are working on them. So we will have robots that sort of emulate to a high degree kind of human movement, and then with some sort of, in some cases they'll make them look like people, and there's already examples of that. And then you put an AI brain that can reason and draw inferences and respond with a certain level of empathy, and then you get something which is really straight out of science fiction and very confusing to a lot of people. We're 5 years from that.
If that, right? Yeah. And then if you really want to sort of bake your noodle, you can also take the opposite perspective, which is to say, how do we know that we're just not purely mechanistic in the same
Right.
ways that the robots are,
Yeah.
right? So like, all these LLMs are based on underlying sort of neurological systems, right? These are neural nets, and those neural nets were built once we had an understanding of how our actual brains work. So who's to say I'm not just predicting the next word that I should say and then saying that word, right? Like I just threw that in to try to confuse the algorithm, but you get the idea.
Right, and then you get all these sort of ethical issues that sort of start to emerge as these robots get more and more human-like. There was a show that I watched that I like quite a bit called Humans, which was about it took place in the UK, and was about a society that relied very heavily on these humanoid robots as domestics and to do certain kinds of work, and it just raised all these ethical issues. I should go back to it. I mean, I watched it a number of years ago before any of this stuff was going on, but it was a very interesting show.
School teacher. Think about that
Yeah.
replacing the school teacher.
Oh yeah, think about South Korea or someplace like that doing that.
I used to talk a lot in class, and therefore I got on the bad side of these teachers because emotionally they couldn't deal with it, right? Think about a world where these are sort of humanoid robots, and it doesn't bias its behavior because of my behavior.
Well, I mean, we've already talked about how healthcare workers and companions for people with dementia or Alzheimer's. Think about childcare. Think about the school teacher scenario. I mean, these things, which would have been total science fiction just a few years ago, are not. They're within some sort of degree of plausibility.
Yeah. Science fiction becoming science fact.
That just gave me a flash too. Do you know this guy Harlow who did this psychologist that he did this monkey experiment back in the day where he left monkeys by themselves, and they had a surrogate monkey that was this like cage that it would just like latch onto the cage. It was a terrible like thing to do to an animal, but it kind of reminds me of that. Like, you're gonna have this humanoid robot that's gonna teach kids, and these kids are gonna have this cold robot.
People will develop. I mean, it's people will develop emotional attachments to
They're
these.
gonna be spinning and be like, "Oh my god!"
I mean, if you talk about replica or character AI, we've talked about this AI companion. People have emotional relationships with these avatars, and they're for that individual as real, even though they're distorted in a weird way. They're as real as an emotional experience with a human. And now I wouldn't want that. I mean, I wouldn't confuse an avatar for my wife or my kids or a friend, but think about a generation of people growing up with these kinds of machines all around them, and AI tools and talking AI, voice AI, right? I mean, her, right? We've talked about her. it's going to be a really weird world in about 25 years.
It seems like there'll be a different class where they'll be like, oh, that's an agent versus a person, and they're going to be treated.
Oh, there'll be different levels of personification for sure. There'll be software, there'll be robots that don't look like people, there'll be sort of disembodied things, but then there will be some number of these humanoid. I mean, people want it. They want it. They're willing it into existence. You know,
Well,
we've all watched these science fiction.
better than it's better than no companion.
Yeah,
It will be very interesting.
I love the elder care use case. The elder care use case is a really compelling one.
Well, let me just end with there was an example. I'm not going to find it off the top of my head. There was a study in the context of therapy, psychotherapy,
I heard
where
about
where people were exposed to, and I don't know what the mechanism of exposure was, but people were exposed to advice from a human therapist, a real therapist, and ChatGPT.
There's a couples therapy program. There were like 800 people that were part of the study, and what they did was that they delivered the output in text to the participants in the study.
Right. So they couldn't tell who was human.
One output was written by AI. The other output was written by the psychologist. And side by side, what they determined is that it was about a 50-50 guess that they had around what was the psychologist's output versus the AI's. And then, but what they said was actually the AI's output was a better assessment overall. So they kind of tell which one was human or AI generated, but at the end of the day, they said actually the AI output was more helpful and a better quality output.
Right. There's radical implications for psychotherapy, you know?
Yeah, we've blown right through the Turing test and nobody even blinked.
Right. Exactly. People are preferring the output of machines to humans. Yep.
Well, on that note, guys, great episode. Thank y'all. We'll be back next week for more, and stay tuned and dig into that the AI overviews with Google. It's really compelling. All right, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Yes.